Young Tommy Engels has a problem. He needs to earn the respect of his peers. So he gets Sega Genesis, the ultimate action system.
This shopping mall in affluent Westchester County, New York, exemplifies how easy it is for children, or adults for that matter, to get their hands on satanic material. We stress it's perfectly legal.
I mean, imagine this game with iPhones that bring sense around, digital contact devices, data gloves, those types of things. That's the other level, and we're beginning to move into that. Sega, to my knowledge, has got a new wraparound vision screen available right now. At least it's been advertised, or it's coming out. Maybe they could provide some more information about that. But that's where kids literally physically participate in the violence. You see, the studies that need to be done, we need to redo all the classic television studies where we observed, how kids responded to the violence they saw on television. We need to redo all of those things in the context of watching a game like Night Trap. We don't know what the results are, but we can pretty much
make some guesses.
I remember the first time I saw Mortal Kombat. I was visiting family in Florida with my parents. My aunt and her friends were playing a game I had never seen before. This was the 1990s, and being a little kid, my gaming catalog was limited to the likes of Ocarina of Time, Sonic, Super Mario, and
Sega Rally Championship.
But when it was finally my turn to play, y'all, I lost every round. I was a little scrub. Even then, I had so much fun playing Mortal Kombat, and over the next decade, I became a big fan of the franchise, including many of my friends. It's safe to say, as a kid, it was the first time I had ever seen a grown man rip the spine out of another grown man's body. I never went on to reenact the practice myself, nor did any of my friends who also played Mortal Kombat. But during the 1990s, this was a major concern of government officials, parents, youth-focused organizations, and academics, that a game like Mortal Kombat could turn children into violent little monsters. Specifically boys. They were very boy targeted because a lot of these games in their advertising targeted young boys. But that concern led to one of the most wacky and unhinged moments in the Senate that unfolded live on C-SPAN for all to see. So in the words of my mother, hold your draws, because we about to take a trip down Crazy Town. That was so corny. In order to understand how this whole debacle unfolded, we need to understand what was going on in America at this time, especially leading up to this period. The 1980s and 1990s were back-to-back decades of moral panic. It was always something, and it was always about the children. Oh, the children, the poor children. The 1980s were dominated by the Satanic Panic.
A lot of people hear the phrase, "my sweet Satan," here when we play this backwards. Can you hear it?
My sweet Satan.
Widespread hysteria about organized satanic cults targeting kids. The McMartin preschool trial, which was the longest and most expensive criminal trial in U.S. history at that time, saw an entire California family falsely accused of horrific acts of child abuse. No convictions, 6 years of legal proceedings. The whole thing was built on a scientifically discredited therapy method called repressed memory therapy that planted false memories in children. And all of this was amplified by sensationalized TV news specials and moral campaigns from the Christian right against things like Dungeons and Dragons. Sound familiar? Then the 90s rolled in with the advent of the super predator. The crack epidemic had gutted entire neighborhoods, and gang violence was a nightly news fixture. And a Princeton criminologist named John DeLulio, however his name is pronounced, took it upon himself to start circulating a theory that America was about to be overrun by a new type of criminal that he called super predators. Impulsive, remorseless young men that committed acts of SA, murder, and mugging with no conscience or empathy.
We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first
We have to bring them to heel.
The definition was never overtly racist. They never just were like, we're specifically targeting black and brown people, but everybody knew who they were talking about. The policies that followed included trying children as adults, mandatory minimums, mass incarceration of Black and brown youth. And what's really up is, from a statistics POV, DeLulio was completely wrong, because juvenile crime had already begun to decline around the time that he published this whole super predator mess. But the damage was done, and people had already begun to cling to this lie. And then there was also the rise of gangster rap. The explicit lyrics of artists like NWA provoked another wave of panic, tangled up in a war on crime that framed it as a product of lawless inner city ghettos. The FBI really did not like the police. So when politicians needed something else to point at, video games were the next logical witch hunt. And the two games at the center of all of this was Mortal Kombat and also a game called Night Trap. And if you're watching this video, you more than likely already know what Mortal Kombat is, but just in case. Mortal Kombat is a fighting game, and originally it was an arcade game, but it made its way into homes on September 13th in 1993, and it was simultaneously released on Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. What made it controversial was the fatality system. I mean, they were in a Senate hearing, you'll see that they were complaining about like every aspect of it essentially, but the fatality system specifically was the crux of their concerns and arguments. At the end of a match, you can finish your opponent in the most brutal of ways: ripping out hearts, decapitation, pulling someone's spine out through the other side of their body type shit. And for 1993, with all this shit going on that I just talked about, having digitized human characters that looked relatively realistic for that time at least, was unlike anything that had existed in a home console game. And this one is where things get a bit interesting, because the controversy around Night Trap was almost entirely built on a lie. Night Trap was a Sega CD game, the Sega CD being a very expensive add-on to the Sega Genesis console that a lot of people didn't even own because it was so expensive, but it used full motion video, meaning actual real actors instead of animated characters. And for all you youngins out there, this approach in gaming was actually pretty common. From time to time, you'd see a game where it was like a live action type of situation. So these were the two games at the center of all of this. While Congress was gearing up to lose their minds, the industry was already trying to get ahead of it, sort of. Earlier in 1993, the Better Business Bureau caught wind that politicians were sniffing around video game content and sent a heads up to their board members, including both Sega and Nintendo, basically saying, hey, you might want to, get your shit together. And Nintendo's response was, we're good, because they had been internally policing their own content since 1985. If a game didn't pass Nintendo's guidelines, it didn't get made for their system. But when it came to Mortal Kombat, they said, no blood, no guts. And so they required the publisher Acclaim to replace blood with some sus gray substance. I heard it was supposed to be sweat, but I don't know about you. I've never sweat gray. I don't know what bodily fluids look gray, at least if you're healthy. When it came to Night Trap, Nintendo said, absolutely not. We don't want it. We are not putting this on shelves for the Nintendo console. They controlled the cartridge manufacturing process, so they controlled what got made, full stop. But Sega took the opposite approach. They left in the blood, but they also incorporated a cheat code that you could use to unlock a more violent version of Mortal Kombat. And then Sega's other response was to create a rating system. In June of 1993, right before Mortal Kombat dropped on the Genesis, Sega created the VRC to show everyone that, hey, we're responsible adults too. And they created 3 ratings, and it consisted of an independent council of educators, psychologists, and sociologists. And it all, sounds reasonable on paper. But the problem was that nobody trusted it. One of the 2 biggest companies in the industry at that time created a ratings board for the entire industry. That's like Pepsi rating all sodas before they could be sold on shelves. It's a conflict of interest, to say the least. The other issue is that journalists called it out for being inconsistent and very vague. So consumer groups were not satisfied. And then Nintendo looked at this and they said, absolutely not. We are not letting our biggest competitors set the rules for what we can and cannot sell. which is understandable. The first Senate hearing took place on December 9th in 1993. In the morning of the hearing, a coalition of industry companies including Sega, Nintendo, Atari, Walmart, Toys R Us, and Blockbuster, and I think a couple other entities, announced their intention to develop an industry-wide unified rating system. They were like, look, ta-da! We're fixing it. You don't have to step in, Papa. But in reality, it was a very rushed, last-minute attempt to stop Senator Joe Lieberman from passing federal regulation. The industry signed a unity agreement that morning. Sega and Nintendo were like, look, we're ops, but we got bigger ops right now, so we gotta come together. But shortly thereafter, they would spend the entire afternoon in that hearing destroying each other on C-SPAN. The hearing was chaired by Senators Joe Lieberman of Connecticut and Herb Kohl of Wisconsin, with Senator Byron Dorgan of North Dakota also present. And I want to note that the Senate was in recess at this time. So we've got 3 senators in this chamber that nearly regulated an entire industry. And I'm not saying the video game industry didn't need to be regulated, because it truly was the wild, wild west at that time. Any of y'all millennials remember this game? This whole thing reminds me of some of the games I used to play when I was a kid. One of those games being Leisure Suit Larry. There are a bunch of games released under that franchise, but I remember playing the earlier games when I was a kid, and they came out before the official rating system was published, and holy shit, I had no business playing Leisure Suit Larry in elementary school. I mean, I turned out fine, you know. If I had a kid, would I let my child play that shit? Not at that age. So yeah, the shit needed to be regulated. Immediately during the first hearing, you get the impression that this is a witch hunt of sorts, especially against Sega. The first panel was made up of academics and concerned citizens. There was this guy, Dr. Eugene Provenzo, who was a professor of education at the University of Miami, who had studied toys and games for 20 years. He was one of the most notable witnesses to me. He said a lot of things that really stood out in my mind. And what a hell of a area of study, right? Toys and games. Maybe I need to go back to school, you know, because that sounds actually kind of cool. But he called video games participatory television, and he compared them to the Feelies. And this was a reference to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. In the book, Feelies are a type of immersive film designed to keep the masses distracted and controlled, which I feel is an interesting choice from a man whose entire argument is being filmed and broadcasted on television.
Video games are evolving into a new type of interactive medium. Participatory or interactive television is what I'm calling it. Possibly something very close to what Aldous Huxley described in Brave New World as the Feelies.
So safe to say Provenzo wasn't a fan of video games during this hearing, at least the more violent ones. And to buttress his arguments, he cited research to back his claims. Video games were still in their infancy, so he gravitated to the closest thing that was available at that time: television. The research was sparse, nay, close to non-existent when it came to the impact of video games on people, and yet he still modified it to fit his arguments. So now I want to pivot to another interesting event during the first hearing. Senator Dorgan had this to say about Night Trap.
About 2 months ago, I saw the video game Night Trap for the first time. It is a sick, disgusting video game in my judgment. It's an effort to trap and kill women. Shame on people that produce that trash. It's child abuse in my judgment.
After more than an hour of senators describing Night Trap as a game where the players, you, attack women, he corrects the record. He tells them that the whole premise has been misrepresented from the jump, that the entire objective of Night Trap is to protect the women. In the game, you play as a surveillance operator monitoring a full house of young women being stalked by attackers, and your job is to trigger traps to capture capture the attackers before they reach the women. I played Night Trap, not back in the day, but like a couple days ago. And I'm not gonna say that the game shouldn't have had a rating that deters parents from purchasing it for an 8-year-old. Like, that'd be crazy. But it was immediately clear to me that Lieberman and Cole had no idea what this game was actually about. With that being said, even though, you as the player are not enacting violence against these young women, you are there to protect them. Violence against women in media is a problem, like as a whole, not just specific to video games. And it's been an issue for quite some time, long before video games even were invented. So I don't argue that. But what they said was very misleading. And that's I feel like the real description of the game alone, in my opinion, would have been enough to warrant the need for a rating. So this is where things get even more entertaining. Nintendo's representative Howard Lincoln spent most of his testimony positioning Nintendo as the responsible adult in the room. Remember that Unity agreement that I mentioned earlier? The one that they had signed that morning right before the hearing? Out of the window. Once the Senate hearing started, that shit was gone. All bets were off. Nintendo had to look like the good guys. They sanitized Mortal Kombat, they rejected Night Trap, and they lost money doing it. They lost money doing the right thing. And then they got criticized by their own customers for doing it. They were the good guys, right? They're better than Sega. Lincoln told the senators that Night Trap had no rating on it at all when it launched, that small children bought it at stores like Toys R Us, that Sega only added the rating after they started taking heat for it. And he wasn't wrong. But what was interesting was Lincoln sitting there representing Nintendo, acting like some kind of angel sitting next to the devil, Sega.
You judging me?
The game ratings, it just doesn't go far enough. We have to get our hands on the game content. And we've been doing that. Furthermore, I can't let you sit here and buy this nonsense that this Sega Night Trap game was somehow only meant for adults. The fact of the matter is, this is a copy of the packaging. There was no rating on this game at all when the game was introduced. Small children bought this at Toys R Us, and he knows that as well as I do. When they started getting heat about this game, then they adopted the rating system and put ratings on it. And you know as well as I do that you can buy this product.
But in reality, Nintendo was just as brazen in their advertisements and games as Sega was. After Nintendo's representative dogpiled on Sega's, the Senate called out a recent ad for a video game that portrayed violence. Oh my God. So when one of the senators calls Lincoln out for this, or calls Nintendo out for this, Lincoln proceeds to apologize to the Senate and everyone right on the spot. But he also feigns ignorance.
As a matter of fact, when I came into the hearing room this morning, I saw that you've got an advertisement up here for one of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System games that says they've got a bullet with your name on it. Right. Well, let me tell you what I did. I phoned my office to find out that that licensee put that advertisement out without our consent, without our review, and without our permission. And unless that advertisement is withdrawn, that company is in breach of its license agreement. And I'm going to apologize to this committee for the fact that we slipped up and our licensee didn't tell us about this. But let me tell you, when I get back to Seattle, I will call that licensee.
Please, Father, please forgive me. We'll never do it again. I promise, Papa. It was given that. I don't know if it's because of Nintendo, kissing ass or whatever it was. Of course, Sega releasing Night Trap and all that. But you could tell that the Senate was more partial towards Nintendo. And I think this was due to the groveling that took place and the back-to-back attempts to punch down on Sega. Another noteworthy point of the hearing was when Senator Lieberman shows a commercial from Sega, and it's for Mortal Kombat. The whole thing about this commercial was that the child looked to be under 13, and Sega said that the game was directed towards teens in their advertisements and commercials and things like that. You see a very visibly young kid who becomes popular with his peers by buying the game, and he is now bullying his bullies because he got a Sega Genesis.
Okay, to me, if I may, the nerd that you have made into a hero by encouraging him to buy Mortal Kombat looks to be under 13. The ad certainly is calculated to encourage kids to buy that game.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's, watching a bunch of boomers, wealthy politicians dissecting a commercial for a popular video game. I don't know. I don't like to be ageist at all, but there's something about this whole scene that just makes me laugh inside. The hearing ended with Lieberman and Cole essentially telling the industry, you have 1 year to get your shit together or the government will do it for you. Just 1 week after the first hearing, Toys R Us, KB Toys, and other major retailers pulled Night Trap from their shelves. And this was right in the middle of the Christmas shopping season. But here's the thing. Once word got out that the stores were pulling it, people rushed to buy that shit off the shelves before it disappeared. And because of this, sales spiked. Night Trap became a collector's item overnight. Sega would go on to discontinue production entirely in January of 1994 because of the reputational damage it had caused. But meanwhile, Mortal Kombat stayed on shelves because it made too much money. The same Congress that spent an entire hearing talking about the safety of children over profit apparently didn't mind. And as we all know, Mortal Kombat became a hit and it's still relevant in the gaming culture today. And real quick, just to bring everything back full circle, Nintendo would go on to release Night Trap on their own system in 2018, and this would be the 25th anniversary edition. The game Howard Lincoln said had no place in our society on Nintendo 25 years later. Congress came back in March and July of 1994 to check in on the industry's progress and to communicate their list of demands. The industry met those requirements, and as a result, Lieberman's bill to create a federal commission for game ratings died in committee. In July 1994, a coalition of major publishers formed the Interactive Digital Software Association and unveiled the Entertainment Software Rating Board, also known as the ESRB. It's independent, vendor neutral, and not ran by Sega. And the system they built is still used today. It's that little letter in the corner of every game that you've ever purchased. Even with digital storefronts now accounting for the majority of game sales, the ratings are still right there. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is the most famous example of what happens when the system gets tested. San Andreas originally launched with an M rating until a Dutch modder discovered in 2005 that Rockstar had originally programmed an explicit sex minigame into the game, but Rockstar had disabled it before release to secure that M rating, but they left the code sitting in the files. I had no idea about this, and I played the out of San Andreas. I probably had 500 plus hours playing that damn game. When the ESRB found out about this, they yoinked that M rating immediately, and Rockstar had to recall every copy off shelves and resubmit the game just to get it back. At the hearing, one of the panelists said that new studies needed to be conducted to properly assess the impact of video games on children, which fair enough, I agree. Well, it's been 30 years, and 30 years is a long time. And over those 30 years, researchers have been pretty busy doing exactly that. Studies that are actually well designed tend to find effects so small, the numbers are statistically indistinguishable from zero in most cases. When you account for everything else going on in a kid's life, like family environment, mental health, school life, peer influences, the relationship between violent games and real-world aggression basically disappears. Man, what a shit show. That was pretty entertaining. I was really concerned about watching hours of C-SPAN. There are so many other things I'd rather do, like, I don't know, eat a bucket of peas. And y'all, I hate peas. Now, before I wrap up this video, I just want to share my final thoughts on all of this. As I've already stated, I don't disagree with the fact that the video game industry needed to have some type of regulation. Not by the government, but some form of regulation. I wouldn't want my nephew when he was 10 years old to be playing GTA. You know, I actually knew a kid that was around that age playing GTA, and he was a disrespectful little shit. The issue I have is with twisting the facts. Anyway, that's all, folks. If you like the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if the option is actually there, YouTube, go ahead and hype the video. See y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.
This game encourages players to shoot this gun, which is called a justifier. In other words, this is the handheld implement with which you play the game by shooting it at the screen, and the more successful you are, the more powerful the gun becomes.